This video lecture will address cultural movements and their impact on literature. We will look specifically at feminism along with a poem by Adrienne Sue, as well as the Native American Renaissance along with a poem by Sherman Alexie. While there are many cultural movements that have impacted literature, the two that we're going to focus on today are feminism and multiculturalism. A literary canon is an authoritative list of works of literature that are widely studied and read. The works included in the canon are considered the classics. They establish the standards of great writing and serve as a basis for judgment of emerging works of literature. The canon has shifted and changed, and today it is much more inclusive than it was even 30 years ago. However, for a long time, the canon was composed of predominantly white male writers: William Shakespeare, John Milton, William Blake, William Wordsworth, Oscar Wilde, Charles Dickens, Joseph Conrad, Mark Twain, etc. This is called the English canon. There were select women included in this canon, such as the Bronte sisters, Charlotte and Emily, Edith Wharton, Christina Rossetti, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but males far outnumbered females, and the list excluded writers of other races and from other cultures. The feminist movement was important not just in terms of literature, but in terms of women fighting for and gaining equal rights. For literature, feminism led to the inclusion of more female writers and a broader definition of female roles in poetry, novels, and other works of literature. There are many more women writers included in the canon that are read and studied today. Multiculturalism is very broad. The purpose is to make literature more inclusive and recognize authors of different races and cultures. In the United States, this movement has led to writers of color becoming widely recognized and read: African American, Native American, Asian American, and Latino writers. Some of these writers include Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, Sherman Alexie, Amy Tan, and Julia Alvarez. The feminist movement is broken up into 3 waves or periods of time. Each wave had its own purpose and followed some of the principles of the wave that came before it. With first-wave feminism, it began in the 18th century with the publication of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which emphasized female autonomy and independence. It continued into the 19th century and included women activists who fought against slavery, and in the 20th century when activists fought for women's suffrage or the right to vote. In the 20th century, feminism's literary goal was to get people to learn and read about women's issues. The second wave began in the 1960s and continued into the 90s. The focus was on challenging traditional female roles, which were often domestic roles, such as being a wife or a mother. Women sought to create identities and define themselves outside of the home. Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique and explored the roots of dissatisfaction that women experienced by being bound to the home. Another feminist writer, Kate Millett, wrote Sexual Politics. She examined negative female images that showed up in literature, philosophy, psychology, and politics. These images included body image and the image of how a woman was supposed to act according to societal standards. Other writers challenged the idea that women need men and the culture's definition of ideal female beauty. Many writers began to show women as sexual beings in literature. Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar wrote The Mad Woman in the Attic and challenged the female stereotypes of the angel in the house, who was the perfect wife and mother, both angelic and pure, and the stereotype of the mad woman in the attic, who was the woman who dared to display behavior that was not considered appropriate by society. The mad woman in the attic was rebellious or unkempt. The Mad Woman in the Attic refers to Bertha Mason, a character in the novel Jane Eyre, who stepped outside of her angelic, domestic role and was confined to her husband's attic as a result. Gilbert and Gubar noted that these stereotypes showed up in works written by both males and females. They argued that female writers need to reimagine roles for women in literature and break away from these stereotypes. During the second wave, many feminists also challenged the English canon and sought to include more female writers and a broader definition of a woman. The third wave of feminism began in the 1990s and continues today. Third wave feminists strove to be more inclusive. They argued that the second wave did not deal adequately with women outside of the middle class or of a certain culture. Rebecca Walker, Alice Walker's daughter, was a pivotal figure in this wave and pointed out that the second wave did not recognize the unique plights of women of color or women who were not heterosexual. Still other feminists stated that the second wave was not inclusive of the needs of low-income women. During this wave, feminists have continued to address issues of motherhood, romance, body image, the balance of family, work, and life, female rivalry, rape, and sexual abuse. They have sought to shift to a broader definition of women's identity, activities, and desires, and they are proponents of female authors being free to write what and how they wish. So how is this connected to poetry? How does it influence literature? Now we're going to discuss the poem The English Canon by Adrienne Sue. Adrienne Sue's poem The English Canon embodies ideals of both second wave and third wave feminism. The English canon is, of course, a reference to those classic works of literature, those written by white males along with a few females. Many of the classics in the canon are the ones that contain the female stereotypes that second and third wave feminists fought against. In the first stanza, Sue points out the female stereotypes embodied by characters in earlier works of literature, the goddess, the harlot, or the impossible loves. She alludes to Greek mythology and works such as Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, where women embodied these characteristics and filled these limited roles. In the second stanza, she invokes the ideas of third-wave feminism by pointing out the limited roles that her grandfathers could have played in films because they were Asian, as she is, as well as the ideas of second-wave feminism by mentioning shopping and cooking, activities usually described as domestic and ascribed to women. In the third stanza, Sue takes on the issue of female beauty and body image by mentioning the ingrained lesson of maintaining her beauty and brushing her hair until it's gleaming. In the fourth stanza, Sue addresses the notion that literature and society communicated to her that women are supposed to stay slim, dress in an attractive way, and not talk about sex or be sexual, as well as death and violence, topics considered to be distinctly masculine. She addresses the masculine stereotypes of men being the leaders and the warriors and the bearers of news, while women were supposed to play very different roles. A woman's job was to be beautiful and of service to the male in the home. In the fifth stanza, she speaks from a feminist perspective by recognizing that a girl's got to protest, but she also notes that women also need to make money, work, and serve in combat. This isn't a complaint, but merely recognition of the fact that much has changed, but that she still needs to continue to fight these stereotypes, even while taking over these more modern and progressive roles. In the final stanza of the poem, she asserts that a woman needs to trust her gut because her teachers are living in these books of the English canon that perpetuate antiquated stereotypes, and she has to start from scratch to become the independent woman she wants to be. While a reader can read this poem and have an understanding of what's happening and some of the issues that Adrienne Sue is addressing, we can approach this poem in a different way when we have an understanding of feminism and the English canon, and we can read the poem on a much deeper level. The second movement that we're going to discuss today is the Native American Renaissance. The Native American Renaissance began in the late 1960s and continues today. Three key events led to this movement. In the 1960s and 70s, the American Indian movement was occurring. During this movement, American Indians began organizing and staging demonstrations, land takeovers, and the occupation of federal buildings. Activists raised awareness of the existence and living conditions of American Indians, bringing light to rates of unemployment, infant mortality, alcoholism, homelessness, and poverty. The second event occurred in 1969 when Scott Momaday, recognized as the father of the Native American Renaissance, won the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction for his novel House Made of Dawn, which was published in 1968. The third event was the publication of Native American Renaissance by Kenneth Lincoln in 1983. Lincoln recognized the renewal of oral traditions that were translated into Western literary forms. Some writers of the Native American Renaissance illustrated characters' relationships to the land in their tribal period. Some writers explored the traditional spiritual beliefs and rituals within a landscape of poverty, and later writers, who were less likely to set their works on reservations, included pop culture references and humor. Two common issues addressed in the literature from this movement are white shamanism and stereotypes. White shamanism refers to non-Indians adopting a shaman identity and claiming knowledge of beliefs and cultures that they do not possess. Two common stereotypes that are challenged by Native Indian writers are that of the stoic, noble savage in tune with nature and the lazy, dissolute primitive. Sherman Alexie is a writer who challenges these stereotypes in his writing and works to dispel them. So again, let's take our knowledge of the Native American Renaissance and apply it to a poem written by Sherman Alexie. Sherman Alexie's poem, How to Write the Great American Indian Novel, challenges these notions of white shamanism as well as the stereotype of the stoic, noble savage. This poem was quite long, and what I have here is only a small part of it, but we can see these ideas at work in these stanzas that are included in the presentation. The speaker's tone in this poem is not serious. We can tell that this is tongue-in-cheek. The repetition of must emphasizes that these characteristics are part of the stereotypes that many writers, particularly white writers, assign to American Indian characters in literature. Alexie is challenging the literature that stems from white shamanism. In the first stanza, the speaker immediately invokes the stereotype of the noble stoic savage, with a mention of the tragic features of the Indians featured in the novel. In the second stanza, the speaker addresses that many writers mistakenly include horses in all narratives about American Indians, even though not all American Indians are from horse cultures. In the third and fourth stanzas, the Indian woman is described as necessarily beautiful, and the fact that she must be in love with a man who is, if not completely white, then at least partially white. This alludes to many narratives, such as the story of Pocahontas and John Smith, or even more modern films such as The Last of the Mohicans, which is based on a novel, in which two white sisters fall in love with two Indians, one who is a, quote, half-breed, as Alexie states, the other who is full-blooded Indian. In the fifth stanza, we see the stereotype invoked again, as there are references to the male character's connection to nature. His blue veins run through his skin like rivers. In the sixth stanza, the female character is also connected to nature through her body, which invokes images of brown hills, fertile valleys, dewy grass, and clear water. This perpetuates the noble savage stereotype because of its connection to nature. The Stoicism is addressed in the seventh stanza when Alexie writes that if the character is compared to murky water, she must have a secret, that Indians must always have secrets. The final stanza of the poem makes the consequences of these stereotypes and white shamanism clear, the disappearance of Indians, who, quote, will be ghosts. The poem is both pointing out these stereotypes and acknowledging that they are detrimental to American Indians and their cultures. It is a critique that is delivered with cutting sarcasm. Alexie's dark humor shows through in this poem, while also making a point. This is the conclusion of this video lecture. Cultural movements have a significant impact on literature. By examining these two movements, we can see how poetry is influenced and used to critique the stereotypes and beliefs that the movements are working to dispel.